Hello and welcome back to the Dicebreaker podcast, the only podcast that jiggles, jiggles, wiggles, wiggles and folds. I'm your host, Matt Jarvis.
Whoa.
I'm here this week with two of the team. I'm here with Maddie Cullen. How you doing, Maddie?
Hey, I'm good. I'm good. It's raining,
Excellent.
but I'm good.
Yeah, and so we are pre-recording this for those who are wondering why we are not live as we usually are at 2 p.m. BST on a Friday. It's because you and the video team are heading out, hopefully, as long as the rain doesn't get too bad,
Fingers crossed.
to go and do something quite exciting that should appear on the channel in the next week or two.
Very fun.
So we'll keep that a secret. But
Yeah,
hey, if you like big red balls, you may enjoy what's coming up on
You're
the video
gonna love
channel.
it. Get that notification bell on because you're not gonna want to
Ring
miss
that bell. Look out for those balls. Also joining us, Alex Meehan. Hello, how are you?
Wow, that's not something I have expected you say.
Ring that bell, look out for those balls.
Yeah.
I just realised it's a very unfortunate combination of phrases.
Yeah, I'm good. It's a lot earlier than we usually record.
It is.
So,
It's like just past 10 in the morning.
yeah, I'm trying. Usually this time in the morning, I'm like sort of half fugue state. So trying to get pumped for the podcast. Like
Just put coffee into your veins or something.
Yeah.
This is-
Straight in.
Yeah, honestly, this is where I thrive. I thrive early in the morning. Like this is almost like a little post peak for me. Like I thrive at about 6:30 to 7.
Oh wow.
I get up,
Yeah.
I watch a movie, like I might read a book, I look out at the bird feeder and go, wow, those are big doves.
Matt Jarvis is you are a weird little gnome. You
Thank
wake
you.
up at like 5 in the morning or
I
something.
do, yeah, and then I sneak downstairs because my wife sleeps in.
Yeah, 'cause
and I
she's
normally,
normal.
like, watch some art house film that Sarah would not appreciate. Not in terms of like, oh, I'm so elitist, but she just doesn't like the kind of films that I watch. So I watch those by myself and don't subject her to them.
No.
So
Yeah.
there we go.
No, Maddie and I were talking about this yesterday, like our peak period, and that this definitely is not one of them. For
First
me,
thing on Friday morning.
yeah, well, first thing on any morning, yeah. I mean,
I feel like especially Friday, right? Like
Yeah.
Friday, traditionally the day of
I
like,
love it.
minimal.
I thrive in the morning, and a Friday morning, I'm like, it's Friday, it's the last day of the week, I'm getting excited for things.
Oh, do you get that like last mile like burst of energy?
Yes, very much so.
for me, it's all about the evening. That's when I'm like,
See, I'm asleep by like.
I know.
I'm drowsy at 7. I'm gone by 8:30.
It's not
Anyway,
normal.
Hopefully, we're here to bring a burst of energy to your Friday or whenever you're listening to this, as we talk about board games, tabletop games, all sorts of stuff. In a slightly shorter podcast because, like I say, Maddie's got to run off at some point
I do.
to go do an obstacle course.
What? No, don't give it away.
A little tighter. Hey, I haven't given away exactly.
I will
and
be facing
the
some
fun is in watching.
obstacles.
Yes.
That's true.
Isn't every day an obstacle course in its own way? But let's dive in, as we always do, with what we've been playing this week, which excitingly, we've actually played quite a lot together this week because we had our Dicebreaker game day, which we now have
Praise be.
about once a month, where we just take a day to play some stuff together in the office, which was very nice to come down and see everyone and to play some games. So should we dive in with what we played on that day? Because I know that we've all played them.
Yeah.
So the first game that we played two kind of fairly chunky games. The first is Ankh, Gods of Egypt.
Yeah, like we discussed on the stream, not the Gods of Egypt film.
Yeah,
Which I didn't
Which-
even know existed, so it was all very
Yeah.
confusing to me, those
very
references.
bad.
We also immediately started talking about it, and I was like, this is great. Now I get to talk about Gods of Egypt.
Yeah, Gods of Egypt, the
Perfect.
movie is real trash.
It's pretty bad. It's like a video game film,
Oof.
basically. Where they just jump through CGI scenes and there's some quips. Although it does have, oh my goodness, the guy who played Black Panther.
Chadwick Boseman.
Yeah, he's in it.
Oh,
He's really good. He's the best thing in it.
I can believe that.
Yeah. Gods of Egypt. It's not that bad film. It's a board game. That's the third in the trilogy, the mythic quote trilogy by Eric Lang.
He's made some very good games. I would say that I will put myself out there and say Eric Lang, probably like one of the hardest working and like fairly most consistent designers of the last 10 years. Like, he's made some really fantastic games.
Bangers, yeah.
And some surprising, like the Godfather game that he made that nobody played apart from me apparently, is for a licensed game based on the Godfather, like surprisingly great. It's like one of those real sleeper hits.
Yeah.
Sleeper with the fishes hits, if you will.
God.
That was the fact there was any kind of reaction to that is far more generous than it deserved.
Yeah, there is an interview that can read on the website back when Ankh was coming out with Eric, and he just seems very passionate about what he does. He's just really into talking about, what inspired him to make the game, the fact that originally it was going to be released around the same time as Kemet, which is another Egyptian-themed war game, so quite similar. And we did notice quite a few similarities with Kemet and Ankh, Gods of Egypt. But he had to delay the release because he was like, I don't want to bring out this board game the same time as Kemet and be like, oh, they're very similar games. But no, this is part of the same trilogy as Blood Rage and Rising Sun, which are both pretty popular board games in their own right. And then this one was quite hyped up, had a Kickstarter release, came out, was delivered last year, I think. Now it's available widely on retail. It's quite an expensive one, but it's mostly because it's just full of miniatures. But those games often are.
So we played it together, and I think Wheels and I played Blood Rage, and initially the digital version of Blood Rage.
Yeah, which you've said is not maybe the best way to experience Blood Rage, let's say.
It's unfortunate, that app had just come out, and it's just mostly digital, so you expect more, but it was very broken, and so it kind of ruined the experience a little bit, but I could see the potential. Blood Rage is like Norse Viking themed. Rising Sun is ancient Japan, like samurai, that kind of era, and then Ankh, Gods of Egypt, is obviously Egyptian. It's important to note that Eric Lang is none of those. And there is a slight element of like,
It is, it's kind of the blockbuster movie take on those kinds of mythologies. Like it does have to be said, it doesn't really delve that deeply into it. It's fairly surface level, and it's like, look at these cool miniatures of these gods.
Yeah, there is, like, I've noticed particularly recently, there is a running theme of European publishers putting out board games based on like cultures and histories that they have absolutely no connection to. Same with the designers. Like at the moment, it's all about South American cultures at the moment. Like there are so many games that are coming out that are based around like Mayan or Aztec. Like
it'd be really nice to see something from some people.
From South America, right?
Very interesting place that I feel like we don't get to see.
Instead
as
of
much on like authentically, so it'd be lovely to see.
But Ankh definitely comes like from a very like Matt said, a very blockbustery, like surface level. It's very much like the Mummy style. The heroes. So in the game, you play as Egyptian gods. You've got like Anubis and Ra and Amun, your classics. And each god has a unique power that kind of comes into play, but it's not hugely important. And it's kind of like a mixture between a Euro game and a war game. I'd say it leans more into Euro game than war game, because it's very much more about area control rather than like I'm going to destroy your troops. But let's get into talking about it. What did we think of Ankh, Gods of Egypt?
It was fun. Enjoyed it.
It was fun.
to start, it was fun. I think I remember. I think the main thing that stood out to me, that you kind of touched on, that the gods have separate powers. I would have liked to have even more kind of separation. It would have been really fun. Like, so obviously you have your gods that have a standard power, and as you're playing, you can kind of pay with worshippers to like level up your god and give them like new powers. But we all have the same powers, which is fun in some ways because you kind of understand what people are doing. But could give kind of a bit more replayability if like those are a bit different. I think that could have been quite fun.
Yeah, I kind of like that there's at least the ability to pick, because there's kind of like an upgrade path, and you get 2 from one column, 2 from the next, and then 2 from the last. So you can kind of customize as you go. But you're right, it's like those are all the same for all the gods.
Yeah.
So at some point, like there's a good chance that, like, I think
kind
there
of-
were multiple of us that had the same powers because they just seemed like they were naturally quite useful.
Yeah, and we had
Yeah.
we played again yesterday, so we played it twice, did it on the live stream again, and we were just like ended up picking the same by the end of it, because I was like, well, this seems like the best one for everybody.
Well, I don't know. Will's picked a power that was pretty good in the. It's more like there's more of an element of weighing up what's going to be more useful to you, maybe in the long term versus short term gain. So like there is a particular power that you can unlock in the 3rd level called Bountiful, which is really good if you're. So the way you win the game is through devotion points, which effectively are victory points, and you can earn those through winning fights, through like taking control of monuments, through like a mixture of area control, winning fights, and there's some little extra ways that you can earn devotion points. And there's a tracker that starts off in red and then it goes to blue. And Bountiful basically allows you to take another devotion point if you're in the red. So it's really good for like boosting you up that sort of that track really quickly. But obviously once you get to the blue, it's useless. So whereas Will's took an ability that allowed him to gain 2 devotion points every time 2 of his figures were involved in a fight that he lost. So that was more useful to him in the long run, and it actually ended up doing wonders for him. So there is an element of picking certain powers over others and what you think is going to be. They do help you form a strategy. So like a lot of the powers I had allowed me to gain more followers, and then I could use those followers later on to help me gain more devotion. So there are like little strategies that you can have, but I wouldn't say that there is a huge amount of depth in the sort of power like collection element. If we're comparing it again to Ankh, if we're comparing Ankh again to Comet, for example, which is also a game where you can acquire powers. In Comet, like there is a much wider variety of powers, and it's more likely that players are going to pick different ones, and therefore going to create much more diverse strategies. And obviously every time you play, it's going to be a bit more different in that area. But the thing that kind of I really enjoyed about Ankh was the fact that it's an interesting scenario of it coming across as again like one of those blockbustery like budget. There's like I don't know how to describe it, like a high budget game. Like the miniatures look really nice.
It's from Common, who did like Zombicide and again like Blood Rage, Rising Sun. And so if you've ever seen any of the games, they are like very classically Kickstarter games, like big boxes full of miniatures, like very impressive, like say production value.
It gives you like a feeling of like a high budget film. Like oh, these are really nice snazzy miniatures. These are really like here's this really cool board with these pieces. It feels like epic in a sense. But then there is definitely an element of strategy there, mostly in sort of setting yourself up for future turns. So I think the part about the game that I like the most is the event sort of system, which is where essentially there are 4 different actions that you can perform on your turn, but you can only perform max 2. And performing an action moves this little tracker along. And if that tracker gets to the end of its row, then an event triggers. And it's kind of moved along the track. And these events can be things like a player claiming a new monument, which are important to gaining devotion points. They can be things like placing camel trains, which basically allow you to separate the board into more sections, which is important when claiming monuments and things. And then there's a conflict event, which is kind of these are the big set pieces of Ankh. So these are the things that most players are working up to.
Yeah, they're like your scoring rounds, right?
Yeah.
They're where fights happen, and they're where you're scoring as well. So they're these big set pieces that everyone is kind of working up to, and they know that they're coming. But obviously you can't exactly plan for what you think your opponents are going to do. And sometimes players pick actions strategically just so they can set themselves up for triggering an event, because the player who triggers the event gets the benefit from it. So I really liked that aspect of the game. I think that's really what drives.
Yeah, it's a cool way of balancing as well, right? Like one person can't just juice the same action or is kind of discouraged because there's a good chance they'll just hand opportunities to their opponents. So you do start thinking like, oh, I could move some of my followers around on the map to like, get to a monument. But if I do that, the person after me is then just going to be able to swipe that event and score for it. So actually, maybe it's better for me to hold off for now, do something else. It's a really interesting system, and I think it's kind of well executed. Like it kind of naturally nudges you to try different things on your turns rather than just get stuck in the same loop, but in a way that isn't then overly like complex or convoluted or anything like that.
Yeah, I will say like it very much fits in that area of there is definitely potential for strategy here. Like you can't just sleepwalk through the game, but it's not like extremely deep. Like it's not really like we played some chunkier strategy games.
Yeah, it's fairly popcorn, right? It's like we've kind of been comparing it to an action movie, and it is that. I feel like it's a solid like 7 out of 10. Like it's got a bit of strategy, it's got good production value. It's probably not going to blow you away if you are like somebody who plays a lot of strategy board games, but it's definitely like fun and enjoyable in its own right.
I think it's ideal for people who haven't played a lot of strategy games that want to get into them. It's definitely a really good entry point because you are most certainly thinking ahead and planning, strategizing, placing your pieces on the board in a certain way. I mean, like the game that Maddie and I played yesterday, there is also this mechanic that I think is not as good as it could be, which is like a merge. So what happens is that on one of the events, the god that is the lowest down on the devotion track merges with the god just above them, and they basically become one god, and those two players are working together. And I do think it initially when we first played, we thought it was a bit unbalanced because the person who is above the losing person has to put their scoring token on the losing person's one, so they're kind of being knocked down, and in some ways that can make it much harder for them to pick up ground. But we also realized that what happened is when two people have their own actions but they're working on with the same god, Maddie and I were able to like set ourselves up really well,
which was fun.
which was like fun to watch, because then Wales was like, this is ridiculous, because then we were able to set ourselves up for events. So we just dominated the event track up to that point because we deliberately chose certain actions that allowed us to then set up to take monuments and things. That to me, I think kind of that system helps balance things out a bit more. And I think it's go on, Maddie.
I was gonna say it'd be nice. I think my only issue with it is that obviously the lower person kind of just like has to just take all of their stuff off, and like so the person you're merging with, you both get each other's god's powers, but you kind of just become the same god, and like all of your gods are dead, and it kind of just feels like, well, I am merged, but I kind of just feel like I'm out of the game, and I'm kind of just like, it's like oh, I'll join your team now and just watch you, I guess. And like it's because it could be really fun, but it kind of does make it feel a little bit more like this one person is now just in charge. Like, oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, it might vary with people. I can tend to be like, because I was involved in both merges, and I was they call it the higher god in both merges. It kind of meant that like I was the one who had the stuff set up, and the other person's stuff had been taken off the board, and it kind of felt difficult for us to work together in that regard.
Yeah, because it's like you've been setting up your strategy for ages, and like I had already worked on my own strategy, so I kept saying to you, I was like, no, you just do what you want, because I was like, I'm working on my own strategy. Like I had a strategy in my head.
You did
and
point
it's hard
out
to, like,
you did point out something really important towards the end that I'd forgotten.
Yeah, I mean, I just
conveniently.
think just like, I think it's fun that like you get to work together, and like if you're struggling behind, it's quite nice like have someone to like boost you and be like, oh, let's like work together and bring it up. I think just mechanically, if you just get to at least like keep some of your figures or something, just to like make it look a little bit more like you're still involved, I think.
Yeah, I
might
love the concept of it. I
help.
think it happens too late. Personally,
Yeah.
I think it would benefit from happening earlier.
Oh, see, I wonder if it happened earlier, whether it'd be more frustrating in some way, because then you've got to spend more of the game like potentially feeling a bit like you've been effectively eliminated, right?
Yeah,
but
I guess it depends on the players.
I think what the other fix they could do would just be to make it so both players feel more involved together.
Yeah, I think that's the thing.
I think like maybe just it's not a big enough thing. Like it seems like a big thing, but it actually doesn't really change an awful lot apart from like taking the other player's stuff off the board.
Yeah.
So maybe if it was made into a bigger thing, that more stuff happened with the merge, like still keeping it balanced, but like still having more for the two players to kind of do with it.
Yeah.
And having it happen earlier on, I think would actually make it mean more, because then like the two players get more time to actually like,
because by that point you're kind of both in your end game strategy.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
I'm working towards this, and so like, and we had very different strategies, so it was like quite hard for me to be like, okay, I've just like given up on mine, and now I've got to try and like work out what yours is, having never played your god.
Yeah, it's interesting.
like,
I feel like it's a concept that wasn't quite fully like developed, and again, I love the idea of it. I think if I saw it in another game, I would, and it was just better done. I feel like I would love that. But yeah, I feel like Matt's 7 out of 10 is a very good. That's a good analysis of the game.
Yeah, it's like I'd happily play it again, but I wouldn't rush out and like drop however much it costs, because I think it's probably a decent chunk, because it's a fairly box. So I guess it's like $80
or something.
It's 60 quid. Yeah. 60, which I think is. I would be surprised if it's £60. Like, there's a lot of miniatures in that box. That's what pushes the price of these games up. Like, but I will say, usually I'm against miniatures for most games because I think it's unnecessary cost. But I feel like the miniatures are a big part of that.
Yeah, they're not excessive here. Like, and this is so we didn't play the Kickstarter version, which comes with miniatures for the monuments as well. So the monuments for us were just like flat cardboard tiles. But yeah, so the miniatures were your god and their followers, basically, which is you know, you've got 6 followers, something like that, and then your god. So it's effectively a little handful of miniatures.
And there are some monsters. And
that's true. Yeah, there's the monsters that you get.
Summon, but I feel like the miniatures play an important part in the game. Like they're part of the blockbuster.
You need that visual representation to really kind of see what's happening. And
I think it's a good mixture of like it's not dozens upon dozens upon dozens of miniatures. Like it's just enough to give it that pop and to, like you say, make it readable.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think the look of the game is a really important part of its appeal, and I think if those miniatures were taken out, it would feel even. I feel like it would feel a lot lesser. Like we would notice we would notice its flaws a lot more, I think.
Yeah, a cute little god miniature to like, oh, it's so cool, it's so cool.
They are good miniatures, like they're nicely sculpted. Like Commando's is kind of got down the art of a good looking miniature.
A war game that we did play that
I was going to say,
miniatures.
Is there anything anyone wants to add on Ankh before we move
Matt,
on to
you
the other
ruined
game
my
we played?
segue.
Sorry. I just want to leave the floor open for any last parting comments. But
no, we can segue.
I would say 7 out of 10. You know, it's good.
Edit this out. Edit it out. Keep my segue in.
Okay, set up your segue again.
Matt, a strategy war game that didn't have big miniatures in,
but does have a big moon is Crescent Moon.
Yeah, you ruined it again, Matt. You ruined it again.
No, we're gonna leave it all in. Yeah, Crescent Moon is the other game we played on our game day, which is not out yet. It comes out on the 26th of May.
Yeah.
It is a game
great.
that is like Root, but not really like Root. So it is an asymmetric game. So everyone's playing with a slightly different set of rules. Although it's worth saying, compared to Root, those rules aren't quite as like wildly different. Like Root, everyone is almost playing a separate game, and then they all kind of collide in the middle.
I would
Here,
say
you got similar concepts that tie everything together, and then it's like tweaks on each of those to some degree.
I would say the key difference here between Root and Crescent Moon is the fact that the factions in Root fundamentally play differently. They have different. I would say they don't have different goals, but they have different play styles.
Yeah,
like completely different.
Yeah, I mean,
Whereas,
the Era, you're building an engine
Like
and trying to keep that engine going. Like
you can't try and do what someone else can do.
No.
Like you physically cannot, mechanically can't. Whereas in
no,
Crescent
you
Moon,
can't.
You can cross over if you wanted to.
Yeah, you can't move your units the same way as the Marquis if you're the Eerie. They just work fundamentally differently. Whereas with Crescent Moon, a lot of the different characters can do the same things as other characters can do. Their objectives are what kind of separate them, I think.
Yeah, and those actions have like little tweaks, but they are at a base level kind of very familiar, which I think is. So I wrote a piece on the website today. You can go and read it. It's already up.
If you're
somehow listening to this while we record this, because I was left quite fascinated by it. I think it is, in some respects, it is better than Root in terms of, I think it is easier to pick up. I think it's easier to introduce people because it is not as, it's not like learning 4 different games and then trying to remember those 4 different games. Root we've now played, I don't know, dozens of times, and I still love it, but it took at least a handful of games to really kind of get it down pat. But Crescent Moon, within that first game that we were playing, it was kind of like, oh, I'm kind of understanding what's going on. Like, it will need more plays to really formulate how you make the best of each faction. But to some degree, like, it didn't feel as intimidating off the bat, and we were able to get up and running a lot quicker.
Yeah.
So to kind of introduce it, it is set in the Middle East around the 10th century. It is not a specific part of the Middle East. It's not a specific time period either. The front of the rulebook, because while I was writing that piece, I was going back through the rulebook. They do say that they consulted with a historical and cultural consultant, as well as the artist, whose name I now forget is Naveed something, is of Muslim origin. So it's an abstracted vision of the Middle East in the 10th century. But
we had some varying opinions on the artwork.
I like it.
Matt and I really like it. I think the front cover especially is just absolutely. I am so tempted to get that game because the front cover
Put it on a shelf.
It's the kind of thing that you would display on a shelf. It's so really evocative of what the game is.
Yeah, and that time period, I think, it's almost like tapestry-esque, like Tapestry with a lowercase, not Tapestry the board game.
No. But I think, Wheels particularly, the card artwork is a little bit. It feels a little bit different.
It's stylized, I would say. But
I kind of liked it. I thought it was fun. I think that the components aren't very jazzy. I do like the little wooden pieces. They're nice. It also reminded me of Pax Mirror a little bit, not just because of the Pax Mirror.
It doesn't have any chalky blocks like Pax Mirror. Pax Mirror has those good, you just want to rub them a little bit.
That's another line there, Matt. You just want to rub them a little bit. I'm writing that down on this piece of paper. But you were explaining the basic concept of the game.
So it is you play on a map, and the map is made up of hex tiles, so it can kind of vary between games. There are some kind of standard setups given in the rulebook, or you can build your own if you are more familiar with it. But in general, there's a river, there are kind of fertile grounds, there are quarries, there's a holy site, and you are essentially kind of wrestling over control of the map as these different factions. So the player count, which I think it's one of the difficult things about it, is it's 4 to 5, but I think really it's 5. So with 4 people, you don't have the nomad, but I think the nomad is one of the best parts of that game. And I think automating the nomad, which is what happens with 4, takes away like some of the best parts of that game,
But
which
it's
is the
similar
player
to
interaction.
it's similar to Root as well in
Yeah.
that sense. Like I don't I don't think a free player game of Root is that great.
It's
I just think
fine,
for
but
it's
it's
fine, but
yeah,
it's not what the game is
it's
meant
not
to
the
be.
intended experience. Yeah. So, and the important thing is that, like Root, these kind of factions, they balance off each other in kind of a very careful way. That means when you take one of them out, it just feels a bit weirdly lopsided. So, for instance, Wills was the Nomad, and as the Nomad, you have units, and for at least 2 of the players, you can't get your own like units, which you need to take over things by force,
you don't have
without
an army.
basically buying them off the Nomad.
Yeah.
So you either have to hire them or you bribe them.
The bribe is great. It's horrible.
Yeah, and
I
that's
love how
like
horrible it is.
you basically make a deal. Like there's no set price, and that's the difference.
Yeah.
Is when there's no Nomad, it's just a set price you pay to the bank.
Yeah.
And the
that's
other
insane.
big thing is that the Nomad, after they sell you those mercenaries, on their turn, they have an action that means they can just disband them and basically pull them back out of you,
Yeah.
which is brutal.
Yeah.
But it means that you kind of have to keep a fairly good relationship, even though, and that game is just, you're all against each other, but you kind of need to stay friendly to some degree. So like, for instance, Maddie, you were the Sultan.
So yeah, like I was basically, again, I couldn't hire my own soldiers. I was basically kind of like setting up towns and like cities and stuff. And I could do that in like anyone's territory. And it meant if I did that, we'd all get some kind of income. But obviously I find it harder to build my own army. So setting up like my own little town without anybody means it's quite hard for me to defend, which I found quite quickly because I had my army depleted.
I'm like, it was fascinating how inherently your actions are not very aggressive. Like you ultimately people could just leave you alone. And you could just quite happily like build your little cities and things, but that would just mean that you win the game. And ultimately, just like Root, you can't just keep playing nice with everyone. You do eventually need to start like getting in there, and because you need to stop other players from winning.
And very much like your whole thing was the only way you could get money was destroying my thing. So it's like we were always going to have to, like, we were just, so your kind of like warlord was set up to kind of bring mine down, basically. Like it was
I would say it's not as much, it's not it's a bit like, you know how we talk about Root a lot, but it's important we talk about Root because I feel like it's the most direct comparison here that we know. But like, it's not like in Root where each of the factions are almost entirely designed to cancel out others. It's a bit more fluid than that because a lot of it does depend on how the map is set up and where players decide to place things. So it was just the case of I was destroying a lot of your stuff because it's what was there, like it because it's the only way for me to gain victory points and a lot of the times money. Like the warlord couldn't build things, so therefore I couldn't just get income from like sticking things on the different hexes. The warlord has to destroy things they have to sack things to get income. So I, when I was playing the warlord, I couldn't just like try and get over to some of the more maybe aggressive.
We were like a little bit by the river. You can't cross the river, and we were like,
rivers kind of, you can't cross rivers. I could spawn my units from influence tokens, but I needed to place an influence token down on the other side of the board, essentially. Which again, Root has a little bit of, where sometimes it's difficult depending on your faction to move things if you're just stationed a certain way. But I find that also very fascinating because it's a sense of, just because of the way that people were playing, the way things were laid out, it just meant that naturally I just started attacking your stuff. Whereas I could easily have also, according to the rulebook, the warlord is more directly opposed to the Caliph, which Liv was playing, because the Caliph places these large structures, like castles and forts and things. And that is more of a direct threat to the warlord anyway, because it's more militarily solid. But also the warlord gets more victory points from taking down things like castles instead of just things like little towns and stuff.
Yeah.
So, but because of the way the board was laid out and the way that we were playing, it's a lot harder for me to get to the Caliph's stuff. So, it's like rings within rings. Like you've got the base sort of strategic differences and stuff between the characters, but then you've got the things that change depending on how, and the game is aware of that. It's like, you know, every game of Crescent Moon is going to be different depending on what people decide to do and how it's played out.
I think that is the thing. And it's like, Maddie, you had like a separate market board and it just didn't have set prices. So it's like we could purchase from the market, which were like 2 coins, 3 coins, 4 coins, and yours just has a question mark.
Yeah.
That's
you
like
decide.
you could, it's like we kind of want to stay friendly with you because it could be really beneficial because those cards help you win fights and let you do other abilities. But as I started like basically taking some of your towns and cities, it was like, well, this is going to make life harder for me later on. So there's always that kind of fun swing between like, well, we're all against each other, but we all also rely on each other in ways that you can't avoid. I think it makes it really, really interesting.
Really forces you to interact.
Yeah, there's a lot. Again, there's some of that in Root where it's like you often do the thing where you're like, we need to take this person down together. You inevitably you try and get someone onto your side to try and help them to take someone down who's doing particularly well, so then you get a chance to win. But it feels like in Crescent Moon there's more direct, specific examples of player interaction with that. With the negotiation over prices, like you know, like I'm not going to come after you this turn at least if you do this, like and your character Matt, the Mashid was quite a sneaky, perfect for you, really, right?
Thanks so much. My machine was basically built around influence. So influence works separately to kind of military strength. So whereas like Meehan's Warlord and like Wheels' Nomad and even the Caliph that Liv was playing,
was more like Caliph is more like structurally military, whereas
I place down influence tokens, and the fun thing about that is that they essentially represent like winning the hearts and minds of those regions rather than like controlling them through an iron fist. So they can kind of coexist with someone else's military pieces. But it means that if people then fight in or around where I have influence tokens, I can then get involved and basically summon like the people of that region to help tide the fight. So, you know, with influence tokens, I can help swing tiebreakers, or I can input cards, or in like, I think one of the best like little unique rules, someone can offer me victory points to like get my support during a fight, and if they win they have to give me those victory points, but that's regardless of whether I actually help. So I don't necessarily have to help, and if they happen to win anyway, I still get those points. Like it doesn't it states that you have to give the points if you win, but you know the machine doesn't necessarily have to support which I think is again, this almost feels like a mix of something like Root with something like Dune, like the original,
definitely,
like 1979 game. In the there's that like constant diplomacy going on of like you can promise something but you don't necessarily have to follow through. And I think Root gets to some of that naturally, but it's not kind of built into the rules in the same way. So I think it was a really, really intriguing game. I think it is, like I say, in some ways you can tell that it draws from things like Root, draws from Dune. It makes some improvements. I think it's easier for people who are interested in a game like Root but think it's quite intimidating. I think this is easier to pick up. Like another important thing is that you take one action each kind of in a sequence, rather than doing like an entire turn where you take multiple actions. So it ends up feeling quite fast. Like even though the playtime is like 2.5 to 3 hours on the box, like in motion, like even with a learning game where we were picking up the rules, it was going around pretty quickly and it was fairly easy to just keep track of like, oh, okay, they did this one thing, now I'm going to do this one thing, and it just goes around like that 4 times each round.
I think the kind of difference here in terms of so it scratches a similar itch that Root does in terms of like, this is a war game where there's strategy and play interaction and asymmetric characters / factions. I think the difference here is, and it really just depends on like what you prefer and kind of what you or you can like many things, but like I'd say Root has more depth in terms of its like mechanics, which can make it really enjoyable if you do want a game that you want to play over and over, just to kind of really get your head around how these things work mechanically. I think Root definitely has that. Whereas Crescent Moon, I think, is more a game of, it's like Matt said, it's more accessible, and it's more like the experience you get with those kind of off the wall player interactions, where it's like there's no set way of doing things necessarily. Like there's less mechanical depth, which does make it easier to learn, but there is those moments of unexpected, like, oh, I'm going to give you these mercenaries, actually now I'm going to disband them.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah,
I'm interested. I really want to play it again. So
yeah, that's how I came away from it. It's like I came away, like, even the first time I played Root, I was like, wow, like kind of blown away by it. And this doesn't quite have the same feel of like it's an instant classic and the first time you play it, but it's still one of those games that I played and was like, I just want to play this again.
Yeah,
it feels like one of those very satisfying games that will get better with each time you play it. And I think it is. Like, we've made a lot of comparisons to Root, and I think it is easy to draw those comparisons because, it is an asymmetric game with about 4 players.
It's an asymmetric war game.
Like, it has a lot to share, but I think actually it kind of stands alone by itself, like, in a way that is pretty impressive given the kind of
shadow.
The Root is a big game with a lot of acclaim under it, and this kind of came out of nowhere. But I think it really does hold up as like a really good game in its own right. Like, I was really won over by it by the end of our game. So
it's got a lot of charm as well. Yeah. Like, I love including in the rule book. There's like a little bit that's in each book for each character. There's a little bit that's like written from an advisor, and it gives you kind of an idea of what your kind of strategy should be if you play this character. And I think that is just a nice little. That's a cute touch, and like, the felt bags. We've not even talked about the felt bags.
The fabric bags are very nice.
Lovely.
They're lovely.
Osprey Games, who publish it, have got a really good track record with production values on board games. They did things like Undaunted. They also put out Frostgrave. Like they've become one of those kind of like smaller publishers, especially here in the UK. But I think they kind of knock it out of the park every time they put out a game. Like, the production values on all their games are just like, wow, this is like something you just want to have out on a table, or like you say, like have on a shelf, because it's nice to look at. But I think here is also just really good fun to play as well.
There's been a lot of chatter around this one, like within the kind of hobbyist community-ish. And I think there's good reason for it, not just because of the comparison with Root, but also like the fact that, it's kind of come from a small publisher, and it's just got a lot of appeal to it. It's just different. Like, it's not the fact that its theme is not just another science fiction or like, war, stereotypical Western war game style. Like, it's got a theme that you don't see an awful lot of. And the artwork is great, and like, again, it's got that asymmetric element, but it's different. Like, it's doing its own thing. So this is definitely one to look out for, I think, and it's definitely one that we want to. I just want to get that copy that we got.
I want to play more of it. And like I say, I think where this really sits nicely is like, if you've always been intimidated by Root, I think this is a good first step towards that. Like, it's a lot easier to come to. I think it won't necessarily reward you. This is obviously based on like fairly early first impressions, but I don't think it's going to have the same long tail as Root.
No.
Unintended, I guess. But I still feel like it's a really well put together game, like really well executed. I was really won over by it, really impressed.
Yeah.
It's going to be at UK Games Expo, which Maddie and I are going to go to.
Yeah.
So maybe I'll buy a copy.
Yes. I'm not going to stop you. I'm going to say that right now. I'm an enabler. I'm a big enabler. I love spending money, so I'm going to be big on that. Shopping.
Is there anything else on Crescent Moon before we move on to anything else we're playing? All right. It's taken up most of this podcast, but should we whiz through other things that we've been playing? If anyone wants to shout out anything,
it's more fun for us to talk about games that we played.
Yeah.
Really, ultimately, that's what we want to do. So, I'll quickly mention that I played Wayfarers of South Tigris, which is the new game from
Garfield Games.
Garfield Games. It's like the first one in the third trilogy of games. So they did the North Sea trilogy, they did the West Kingdom, and now this is the South Tigris. And there's probably going to be one after this trilogy
in the East. I can't remember if they've already announced it. I feel
probably
like I've heard
it might
it
as well
mentioned
have.
around somewhere,
So Wayfarers of South Tigris is kind of, I don't know specifically what it's themed after, but it feels, I'm gonna take a stab at like Middle Eastern as well. It's got that kind of, I think Chase explained it to me, but I
think Tigris and Euphrates is like Northern Africa, I want to say. But obviously it's the river Tigris that runs through Tigris.
So North African,
I believe. I'm not good at geography, but I know
I'm
Tigris
terrible
and
at geography
Euphrates
as
is the
well.
two rivers and they meet, and that's why that game is called that. So it's wherever that river is.
But it's you're essentially playing so you're essentially playing an advisor to the Caliph, who is, and you're mapping out like the world. So it's based on like the fact that navigators of that era were capable of like mapping out entire parts, even discovering that the world wasn't flat. And you it's a tableau building game, so you're making a tableau from these different cards that you purchase. It's quite a lot to begin with a lot of different things that you can do, a lot of symbols, and it's a little bit overwhelming. But once you start getting into it, it's very much one of those games of, I'm going to do this action, so then later on I can do this action. A lot of it is very much worker placement, getting resources, so then later on you can perform this particular action, and slowly but surely build up your tableau, and you eventually score points at the end from various different things in your tableau, such as like getting scoring cards that you can score off by having other cards in your tableau. And it's very much one of those layers upon layers of sort of strategy that way. But I really enjoyed it. It was great. Like, the artwork's fantastic. It's by the artist's name that I can never remember.
Is it the Miko, I think, who did the stuff for Raiders of North Sea and so on? I think they're known as the Miko.
Artwork. Yeah, their full name I can't remember exactly, but then they've done artwork for all of the games in each of those trilogies, and it's just so unique that as soon as you see it, you know immediately that it's them. They're like Kyle Farron in that way. They have that immediately recognizable art style that's just really unique. I thought it was really good. I'd like to play it again. You want to play it with you, Matt Jarvis?
Yeah, I am a big fan of Raiders of the North Sea, and I've dabbled with Architects of the West Kingdom and some of the others in the trilogy of trilogies that
there's a lot of these games, and they're all I think they share the common theme of they're set in different they're set around different historical kind of eras. Like the North Sea is like Viking kind of era. The West Kingdom is like Christian European.
Yeah,
I think
something like that. Like Castle Age.
Yeah. And then Tigris is obviously North Africa, that kind of era when people were making amazing discoveries, etc. So I thought it was good. I'd like to play it again. Maddie.
Yes.
What have you?
I have played. Me and Wheels played some Watergate, which is where one of you is Richard Nixon trying to cover up Watergate, and one of you is a journalist trying to uncover Watergate. I was a journalist. It's quite fun. It's you kind of like pushing back and forth against each other. It kind of like it's based around this big board of like pieces of evidence. You can like connect pieces of evidence as a journalist. and you're going to connect pieces of evidence to Richard Nixon and like various people. They have like colors and stuff, so they can only go in certain places. And then Nixon can like overturn evidence, like basically like burn it, and then you can't access like routes and stuff. It's fun. I enjoyed it. It's good.
It's definitely one of those games that I feel like has a really interesting theme.
Yeah,
But
I was like, how are you going to execute that? But
I kind of thought that I don't know whether the gameplay plays into the theme all that well.
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, like we were looking at the rule book, and literally 2/3 of it is like just information around like the
About
time period,
Watergate.
like contextualizing it, and like obviously like the pieces of evidence, like you have like cards you play that can be like, so like, I am playing like events, so they're like big events that happened around Watergate that like expose things. So like that's like kind of like, oh, this is an event, this is a real thing that happened, and you can like read little stuff about it. So you can learn a little bit. If you
I feel like what you actually do isn't. You're kind of just placing things.
Did I learn much? But yeah,
cool.
that
I
was...
think we have a Let's Play on the channel from way back when, because it's one of the first games. I believe Johnny and Will's played it way back. But yeah, because we had it at EGX the year that Dicebreaker launched, and we were running tables of it. So yeah, I remember kind of feeling similarly. It's like, oh, this is interesting, like gameplay wise, and it's like a unique theme, but it's like the two don't necessarily meld all the time.
Yeah,
it's like,
you could definitely do it with other kind of themes where like one person's trying to uncover something and another is hiding stuff, I guess.
Yeah. Anything else you played, Maddie?
Obviously D&D every week. Oh, I finally ran my first City of Mist session Friday. I finally got to run it rather than just playing, which was very fun. People are... I put out my first mystery, and people were all like uncovering things. They found basically my mystery is set around Alice in Wonderland kind of like coming to life in a weird way, and they've like uncovered the first stage of that, and so they don't really know what's happening with it. So all their characters met in a park, and like a girl had collapsed after she had like a teacup in her hand, and there was like weird like rabbits and like teacups and like flowers everywhere, and they were like, what is going on? It was fun. I've never run a mystery before. It's definitely hard because I had a lot of pieces of evidence that I was like, they're probably not going to find all of it, and it's hard to balance like how much to give them and how much to be like, yeah, you just see this, or be like, oh, I let them like uncover it. But it's fun. I love City of Mist. I think it's very good, like kind of rules light, encourages role play, and just a very fun thematic setting in a noir city with legends giving you powers.
Was this like a custom scenario you put together, or was it like a
no, this is like something I made up. I'm homebreweing. Just
cool.
It's fun. I'm excited to see where it goes, what they uncover next, and try and keep my mystery together and not let it fall apart.
I feel like mysteries are the hardest thing to do in any RPG.
I've tried to keep it pretty simple, I think. But like there's a lot of different... I think the main tip is like give them more clues than you think that they need. Like give them at least 3 clues in every situation.
Backups to backups of like, oh, they completely biffed this roll, so for some reason they didn't like spot this clue.
Well, luckily City of Mist is quite... you don't necessarily have to roll to like do everything, which I think again lends itself well.
Cool.
You're not having to do like investigation checks. Like if someone's like, I'm searching the body, I'm like, cool, yeah, your character like worked for like the government and like, or is like a PI, one of my characters is. So I was like, you probably know where to search, and so you would find this. Like,
that sounds like Gumshoe, which I really like, because I've not played City of Mist, but like Gumshoe I like as a system for mystery stuff, because it does a similar thing of like, you're not rolling investigation. Like if you know something, you just kind of know it, and then it's like you can get further and discover other stuff, and that's more of a chance. But the stuff you need to progress, you will just find.
Yeah, you can't just fail it all, which is nice. I really want to play some more mysteries and do some more. But that's my thing.
Anything else from you both?
No, go back, Jarvis. What else have you been doing? Anything else?
I haven't really been playing much else, but I want to give a shout out because I discovered a game. Actually, they followed us on Instagram, and then I was like, "Oh, that actually seems really interesting." It's a fan-made board game for The Last of Us, which actually came out this week. You can go and freely download it. Again, it's a fan-made project, so they're not selling it, anything like that. But I was kind of taken aback by just how like detailed this project is. So, oh gosh, I'm so sorry, I've forgotten their name. After I spoke to them, Walt something, I think. You can go and read the story on the Dicebreaker website. But anyway, they have created this fan-made board game, and they've redone all the illustration themselves. They've come up with the design themselves, and it's a mixture of the Last of Us video games. It's Last of Us 1, Last of Us Part 2, and then their vision of what the Last of Us 3 could be. And there's a bit of Left Behind in there as well, which was the DLC that eventually became a standalone thing. But it's a really interesting take. So you can play as various different characters from the Last of Us universe. They are affiliated with different factions that kind of... that's where the different timelines come in. Like, it's not set during a specific timeline. So you could have Ellie of Last of Us 1 mixed with Ellie of Part 2, mixed with Ellie of Part 3, and so on. And then the scenarios can be cooperative. So they can be, the players working together to scavenge things and deal with the infected and not make too much noise, or they can be competitive and you can come up against, other human scavengers in the way that the Last of Us video games kind of have that mixture of like, there are a load of infected enemies around, but also humans can be just as deadly and just as much of a threat. And it does some really interesting things with, you collect resource cards and you can craft items that way. When you move, you can either move using movement cards or you can roll a die, but the risk of the die is that if you roll too high, you make noise and then infected will be drawn to you. And the infected work in different ways that, like they do in the video game. Some run straight at you, some are slower but tougher to take down. There's a mixture of firearms and melee weapons and that kind of thing. You can run away and hide in grass if you're quick enough, but or you can try and go all out. So it seems to really capture the spirit of The Last of Us. And it was just one of those fan projects that I was really kind of amazed by. Like, it's a really fully featured board game. Like, it's an original design. It's not just like reskinning something that exists.
Wow.
I think they said they took some inspiration from, I think they originally said they took some inspiration from the Horizon Zero Dawn game, and then that didn't quite work out, so they went with something different.
That's good.
They originally had a much more like, they had a listing mechanic in there, like in the video games, but that just didn't make it very fun. So they stripped that out. So it's been through like rounds of playtesting, and it is like a really impressive thing, and it's just available for free through the Instagram
Sounds awesome.
page. So,
Yeah,
and I think it's interesting because come on, who did Ankh, Gods of Egypt, Blood Rage, Rising Sun, a couple of years ago, they announced that they were working on an official Last of Us board game. Which doesn't have a release date.
Pretty sure they announced it last year.
Yeah. So, but it's definitely been a while since it was announced. We haven't really heard anything else, and we don't know when it's out yet. And so, in the meantime, the fact that a fan has kind of come up with this project, like create, like say, original illustrations, like, and the downloadable files for it are, different boards for the environments, different standees for the characters, but then also storage boxes for like the different sets of ally cards or the different sets of enemy cards. There are like mini expansions based on, specific parts of the stories or specific elements of the games. It's really, really impressive.
Oh, that is cool.
I'd go and check it out. Like, I wrote up a story and spoke with the designer for the Dicebreaker website, but you can also then find the link. And like I say, it's just free because it's a fan project. So it's not an official Naughty Dog thing. It's not like tied to the Last of Us game that's coming out. It's just one fan who decided to make this kind of incredible project. So
the artwork is really good.
It's really good, right?
It's
and
really good.
Like,
there's a box for it and everything.
Yeah, their idea of part 3 is really interesting. It takes place in like New Mexico, and there's like a new original character and an older Ellie that they've come up with. It's so really cool. Like, it's a real undertaking. So yeah, I wanted to give it a shout out because I was kind of blown away by it when I discovered it. And like I say, they followed us on Instagram, and I thought, oh yeah, it'll be one of those. And then looking at it, it was like, wow, this is pretty staggering. Like, what an achievement.
They should Sony, who Naughty Dog, Sony's probably got the rights, right?
Yeah, I think Sony are partnered with Naughty Dog if they don't own them outright, but
yeah, no, they should definitely get on this.
Yeah,
Right.
so
I mean, they've already
Perfect
given that
Steam
license
on,
to Come
but-
On, so
No, well,
maybe
yeah.
Come On, drop them a line. I'm
reach
sure they've
out,
got
be
their
like,
own
"Hey."
design going, but yeah.
Yeah, no, this is awesome. Love that.
All right, I think let's call it there for this week's Dicebreaker podcast. Before we close out, though, I just wanted to shout out. A couple of weeks ago, we mentioned that there was an itch bundle to support to support charities and organizations acting kind of in the wake of the recent Roe versus Wade stuff going on over in the US, where the US Supreme Court, I believe, is looking to overturn Roe versus Wade, which of course effectively legalizes abortion at a federal level. Chase brought up a story a couple of days ago.
You mean it illegalizes?
Yeah.
Yes.
Legalizes.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I meant to say legalizes. So it makes abortion legal, of course, because it is a vital medical bit of medical care and should be legalized, of course. So Chase wrote up a story a couple of days ago about another bundle called the TTRPG for Reproductive Rights Bundles, which you can go and find the links to on the Dicebreaker website. But again, it's like as has become the norm recently, it's a staggering amount of really good games. There's things like Beam Saber in there, which I think is a Blades in the Dark or Forged in the Dark game that's mechs and stuff. There's Glitter Hearts, which is about like transforming heroes like Sailor Moon-esque. There's Legacy, Life Among the Ruins. Like there's some real kind of big names. There's some smaller names as well, but it's like 300 games almost for $5, and that money goes towards
an important cause.
Yeah, it goes to Planned Parenthood and the National Network of Abortion Funds. So you know, both organizations working in the wake of this kind of like terrible news, really. Stripping away
the rights,
essentially basic human rights that every like pregnant person should have access to the ability to get an abortion. So go and check that out. I think that other bundle is still running as well. I know that there are a number of bundles out there that are supporting these organizations. So it benefits the people that need that money and need that support, and it also gets you a load of really good games. So go and check them out if you haven't already. But I wanted to at least just give a shout out in this slightly shorter podcast because it's a good thing. But for now, that is a slightly shorter podcast. We actually spoke about a lot of games, though. It was
it's great.
Quite up to the rafters with games. But
go to Dicebreaker.com.
Yeah, go to Dicebreaker.com. The games we spoke about
there
included Ankh, Gods of Egypt, Crescent Moon, Wayfarers of South Tigris, Watergate, City of Mist, D&D, of course, and Last of Us board game, I think is what it's just called on Instagram. So go and check out those games if you were taken with any of our thoughts. But for now, this has been the Dicebreaker podcast. Thank you for listening. Thank you, of course, to Maddie Khan for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Alex Meehan, for joining us.
Thanks for having me. You should come to the YouTube Dicebreaker channel every Friday at 2 p.m. BST, usually, because that's when we record it live. And you should also subscribe and join our membership.
I don't have an outro to do now because Meehan just did it, but dicebreaker.com, youtube.com/dicebreaker every Friday from 2 p.m. BST normally, and keep your eyes out for the video that Maddie is about to go and record with Lego Whales, which I'm sure will be a laugh. But until then, look after yourselves out there. Take care. We will see you again very soon on the Dicebreaker podcast. But until then, have a lovely day. Bye-bye.